So the first problem is example 1.1, which is directly from the textbook. It has two parts, A and B. So let's take a look at what is A. So for any productivity problem, you need to know two things. One is output, another one is input. So in A, the output is 600 policies, right? 600 policies. And what is the input? Input in this case is the 3 people working 8 hours per day, 5 days per week. So in this case, 3 people working 8 hours per day, 5 days a week. So in this case, 120 hours per week, right? So productivity is a ratio of output by input. So in this case, output is 600 policies per week and input is 120 hours per week. So this is per week. So productivity measures is 5 policies per hour per employee. So it's actually five policies per hour per employee. So the way to interpret this productivity measure is the following. So if an employee spends 1 hour, he or she can actually generate 5 policies. That's the interpretation of this particular number. So let's take a look at part B. Part B has, again, similar to part A, we need to figure out what is output and what is input. So output is what? So output output is 400 units times $10, which is $4,000. So in the previous case, the output was calculated in terms of the number of units or number of policies generated. In this case, we calculate the output in terms of the revenue generated in terms of dollars. Let's take a look at what is input. Right? Input is, we have 3 factors. One is the money spent in labor, which is $400, and then money spent in materials, which is $1,000, and overhead cost of $300, which put together you have a total of 1,700. So this particular measure is called as multi-factor productivity because you have multiple factors such as labor, materials, overhead is included in the input. Right? So now, what is your productivity measure? So in this case, output is $4,000 divided by input of $1,700. That is equal to 2.353. So what this means is that for every dollar you invest in this particular system, you should be able to generate $2.353 as an output. So in this case, you get a good return, this is a nice system to invest. So let's take a look at the second problem. So if you want to read the problem, maybe this is a good time for you to pause the video. Then once you read the problem, you can play it back on. So in this problem, we have, again, similar thing. You have to calculate the output. So output, in this case, they are actually manufacturing a batch of 132 garments, of which 52 were of low quality and 80 were of high quality. So this 80 garments can be sold at $200 per piece. right? So 80 garments can be sold at $200 per piece, and the rest, which is the low quality products, those 52 garments can be sold at $90 per piece. So total put together, they generate $20,680 in revenue. So that is your output. In order to create the revenue, they have to invest 360 hours, 360 labor hours. So that is your input. So the productivity measure in this case is again the ratio of output to the input. So $20,680 by, so this is dollar, by 360 hours, which leads to $57.44 per hour. So the interpretation of this particular number is the following: for every labor hour they invest, they are able to generate $57.44. All right, so let's take a look at the last problem here. And again, if you wanted to read the problem, please pause the video. All right, so it's two parts. One is calculating the productivity ratio. Another one is calculating the labor productivity ratio. So I'm going to call this as part A and this one as part B. So part A, of course, what is the outputs? So in this case, output is measured in terms of the number of units they produce, which is 1102, right? And the input is basically the amount of money they spent in order to produce 1102 units, right? So you have to add up all the costs, 12158 plus $20,829 plus 9,414. So that amounts to $42,401, and productivity ratio is output, which is 1102, by input, which is $42,401. So this is, I'm sorry, I think I need to correct this a little bit. So output is so in this problem, number of units produced as given, which is 1102, and they can also, this particular, each one of those unit is valued in hours. So you need to multiply that $110 with 1102 in order to calculate what is the total value created, or total value of the output, right? So once you have that, now you can actually go back and add this number in the output. The ratio amounts to 2.859. What this means is, what this 2.859 stands for is the fact that if you invest $1 in this particular company, you would be able to generate $2.859. So that is the interpretation of that number. Now let's take a look at the second part, labor productivity ratio. If you look at it, they want us to calculate the labor productivity ratio in terms of units per hour. So we already know it's given. The output is given 1102 units, right? But we need to calculate what is the input. So in this case, the input is the labor total labor hours spent. So this total labor hours spent, the total cost spent in labor is 12158, right? And for every time and the cost of labor is $50 per hour. So you can use those two information to calculate the total labor hours spent. So total labor hours spent is the following: total labor cost divided by labor cost per hour, right? So here 12158 is the total labor cost, and the labor cost per hour is $50. So that is 243.16 hours, right? So now you can use both the output and input to calculate the productivity. So 1102 divided by 243.16 gives you 4.532 units per labor hour. So the interpretation of this number is that for every labor hour they spend, they are able to generate 4.53 units as an output. So this is the end of the video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it's useful. Thank you.